Hi kiddos, how are you doing today? Today's lesson is going to be on Beatrix Potter. Beatrix Potter is a very famous children's author, and I bet that you have at least one of her books in your library somewhere. You can ask your parents if you have one of her books. The most famous one is The Tale of Peter Rabbit, and that's the film that I asked your parents to have you watch yesterday. So I hope you had a chance to look at it. Probably one of the biggest selling children's books ever in the history of children's books. So if you did get to see it, I have to say that some of Beatrix Potter's stories have a little scary edge to them, like Peter being chased by Mr. McGregor. Although Mr. McGregor makes me laugh because I just love the things he said in the movie, like, "Stop, thief! Come back here, you wee beastie." He says a lot of funny things in there, but it's not very funny that he's trying to chase down Peter Rabbit, although I have chased a few bunnies out of my garden in my time. So I guess I get where Mr. McGregor's coming from, but when you make an animal animated like that, you kind of root for the animal, don't you? So this, you will also note on this poster, that's old Mrs. Rabbit. And in the movie, old Mrs. Rabbit tells the 4 bunnies to go pick blackberries for dinner. And of course, the 3 girls, Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, because that's how you would say their name in England, they were good little bunnies, and they went and they found blackberries. But Peter was a naughty rabbit. Peter, that's how you say it, not Peter. Peter was a naughty rabbit, and Peter went right away to Mr. McGregor's garden. And his mother, old Mrs. Rabbit, had specifically said to him, "Do not go to the garden." So obviously Peter was naughty. Peter liked to make mischief, definitely. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Beatrix Potter. Beatrix Potter was born way back in 1866. That was over 100 years ago. She was actually named Helen Beatrix Potter, and she lived in England. Now Beatrix's parents were very rich. Her dad was a lawyer. They had a beautiful home in England, and they had a vacation home in Scotland. But because of that, her parents were very busy, and they really did not spend much time with her. They had lots of servants, and one of the servants was a governess, or what we would call a nanny. And the nanny would take care of the children pretty much 24/7. If you have a nanny, your nanny usually takes care of you when your parents are working. And this nanny probably lived in the home and took care of the children from morning to night. And it was pretty sad for Beatrix. She really wanted more time with her parents, but in those days, this is just the way it was. She also had a younger brother named Bertram. He was 6 years younger. And if you'll notice, there's Peter, her little pet, because she did actually have a pet named Peter. And you'll notice there's also art supplies, because she was a big artist. She loved artists. Being an artist. She loved drawing. And that's what her and Bertram would spend a lot of their times doing. They had an attic room called the classroom, and they would go up there and they would paint. And they would see how she's looking at this and she's painting it. That's how a lot of good artists paint. They look at something and then they draw it. Just like Bertram here, he is drawing the bones. And that's what's interesting. When they would go to their cottage in Scotland, Bertram and Beatrix would run out to the woods behind their house and capture animals. And you'll note there's a lot of animals in this room. There's a snail, there's turtles, there's lizards, mice, rabbits, butterflies, cats, bats, lizards, I already said that, birds, frogs. They kept all sorts of snakes, all sorts of animals they would catch. And Beatrix loved to draw them. She would look at them and she would draw them. And actually her dad really loved art too. Beatrix had 3 favorite pets. A bunny rabbit named Peter, of course, and 2 mice. They were called Apply Dapply and Hunka Munka. And she actually did have these as pets, and she actually wrote about them. Like I said, her dad did love art, and he would sometimes take her to museums, and he would take her to see artist studios so she could see what a real artist studio looks like and kind of get a feel for it. So that was a special time for Beatrix because she loved to go out with her daddy and see things like this, and he really encouraged her doing art. One thing is she was like Klimt and Monet, and she did start taking lessons from somebody, but just like Klimt and Monet, she really didn't like somebody else telling her how to do her own art. It's like in our classroom, we always say, do it the way your heart tells you. And she felt like her instructors were always telling her to paint a certain way. And she didn't want to paint a certain way. She wanted to paint her way, just like Monet and Klimt. They would often go to their cottage in Scotland, and that's where Beatrix would go out, and she would do lots of pictures of nature. Now, she wouldn't just do drawings of animals, she would also do drawings of mushrooms. She loved mushrooms, and there were lots of different kinds of mushrooms that would grow out in the world. And you probably don't notice very much, but mushrooms kind of appear all over the place. Some of them are poisonous, so don't touch them. But some of them you can eat, and some of them are just really, really beautiful. Like right now is morel hunting. Morel are delicious, but they're really a funny looking mushroom. Well, later on, Bertram was sent to boarding school, and that just made Beatrix very lonely again. But her parents hired a new governess named Annie, and Annie was only 3 years older than Beatrix. So this was wonderful. Finally, Beatrix had somebody who was almost the same age as she was, who she could confide in, and they could talk and laugh, and Beatrix finally wasn't lonely. She finally had somebody she could call a friend. But 2 years later, Annie got married and moved away. So she was alone again. And she started thinking about writing stories. As you'll see, there's Peter Rabbit up there. And I think that's Benjamin Bunny and Peter right there. Benjamin Bunny is his cousin. So she started writing little stories about animals. And the reason she started writing them is because of her friend Annie. Her friend Annie had children, and the first story she wrote was to her son Noel. And she wrote him the story of Peter Rabbit. Now, if you paid attention at the beginning of the movie, when it was the beginning of the movie is real people, and then it goes into the cartoon of Peter Rabbit. When Beatrix sits down to write, she goes, "My dearest Noel, I am going to tell you the story of 4 bunny rabbits." And she proceeds to write the story of Peter Rabbit. And that's how all of her stories got started. She wrote a letter to her friend Annie's son, Noel. The other thing I told you she loved to do was she loved to draw pictures of mushrooms. She loved to study mushrooms. She loved to study the properties of mushrooms. She was convinced that mushrooms had a healing quality that would help people with cancer research. Now, when she tried to publish these pictures and tried to get it known that maybe we should research mushrooms more, the scientists, laughed at her. Because just like Jane Goodall, in those days, women were not considered educated enough, or were not believed to have scientific knowledge, no matter where it came from. So because she was a woman, they said, you're not right. We're not going to publish these. You aren't right about mushrooms. And I am actually going to look to see if there is actually a book that she put together with mushrooms, because I think mushrooms are beautiful things, and I would love to see them too. My mom used to do art with mushrooms, and it was one of my favorite things. So she went back to writing to Noel, and in 1901, she tried to get somebody to publish her little booklets, but nobody would do it. So she took it upon herself to publish her own books. She made about 200 copies, and she gave them out to friends, and she brought them to local bookstores, and those bookstores sold out their books. And along came a man from a publishing company, what was it called? The Frederick Warm Publishing Company. He wanted her to make the drawings larger and to rewrite the story. Well, Beatrix agreed to rewrite the story a bit, but she refused to make the drawings bigger because she, in her words, she needed them to be small so that children's hands could hold them easily. And they're tiny little books, so I get that. They're about this size. The books are about this size. So her books went out to the bookstores that she published, and they sold out. Everywhere they went, little children wanted them. See how they're holding them in their hands? Everybody wanted these books, and she got very rich. She made a lot of money selling these books, and because of that, she decided to buy Hilltop Farm. Again, in the movie, that's where she walks in. That's the Hilltop Farm is the door she walks into when it's raining, and she sits down to write her story to Noel. Hilltop Farm is a beautiful farm in the English countryside, and she, again, kept a lot of her animals, like her pet, I think that's it, Mrs. Tiggy Winkle, which is another movie I'll send to your parents to watch, and Jemima Puddle Duck. And also there's Tom Kitten. So you're going to see a lot more, I'm going to send a lot more videos of Beatrix Potter's works to your parents in a little bit. But Hilltop Farm mainly was a place for her to take care of animals. She took care of cows, sheep, pigs, and chickens. So it was a real working farm. Now, Beatrix was 36 when her books finally got published. And she hadn't gotten married yet, and it was not until 1912 that she got married to a man named William. And they bought Castle Cottage, and they moved into Castle Cottage together. Now, the sad thing about Beatrix is she could not have children. Her tummy just didn't work right. She just couldn't have children. So the children that would come to Castle Cottage, Hilltop Farm, and the surrounding farms, because she did end up buying the surrounding farms and making them into a big museum in the neighborhood where kids and families could just walk along on the paths out in the country and enjoy the country scenery. But she enjoyed watching the children. So in a way, the children that loved her books and the children that would come to visit Hilltop Farm were like her own children. So that satisfied her in that way. The other thing that you might not know about her is she was a sheep farmer, and she was a big prize winner. I think her sheep were called Harrisford sheep, and she won blue ribbons. She won a lot of prizes for her wonderful sheep. And that was very important to her. She did that, as you can see, she's very old here with her husband, William, and she did that till she died. Well, Beatrix died in 1943 at the age of 77, and she will live on in our memories forever because of all her little books, Jemima Puddle Duck, Tom Kitten, Mrs. Tiggy Winkle, Mr. Todd the Fox, Samuel Whiskers, we're going to learn about him in a little bit, a little mouse, Mr. Toad, Mr. Jeremy Fisher, and of course, Peter Rabbit. So that is the story of Beatrix Potter. She has published 23 tales of Peter Rabbit and others, as you can see here. So I think that you should go in your house and ask your mom and dad if you have any books by Beatrix Potter. And if you do, take a picture of yourself holding the book. I have a book. This is about the size of her books. They were maybe a little not as long. They were about this size, but they were about this size for little children's hands. And this is another book about Beatrix and her sad. She was very sad growing up. And just so you know, Peta used to try to eat her paints. Can you guess which color was Peta's favorite color? I'll give you a clue. It's the same color as my favorite color. So anyway, that is the story of Beatrix Potter. Tomorrow I am going to be bringing some herbs in to show you, or I might do it from my home. And just a couple things that we would have been doing in the classroom if you were here. This would have been on the discovery table. There would have been books all over the discovery table for you to look at, and all sorts of things like that. So, man, I'm sad. I'm sad like Beatrix Potter. But it is the way it is. So I hope you enjoy this. I hope you enjoy Beatrix Potter. And again, I challenge you to look around your house and see if you got any Beatrix Potter books or anything like paintings, or a lot of, like when my daughter was born, she got a little bowl and cup and plate that had Beatrix Potter on it. So look around your room and see if you see any Beatrix Potter, or ask Mom and Dad, do we have any Beatrix Potter? And take a picture of it and send it to me. Okay? I miss you. Bye-bye.